Vocal synthesizers have come a long way in the last 20 years. Improvements in programming and recording technology have given us better sound quality, even as the file sizes for voice banks have gotten smaller. And as the market has grown, so has the roster of different engines and vocal types to choose from. And just in the last handful of years, vocal synth developers have begun incorporating techniques like deep learning and neural networks, that is to say, artificial intelligence. Far from the generative AI voice dupes that have cropped up in every corner of the internet, the sort of thing that scrapes through as many recordings by a given artist as it can find, regardless of whether it has permission to use them. The AI voice banks created for the likes of Vocaloid, Synthesizer V, and Voicona are contracted projects based around the performances of the voice provider, who has chosen to make their voice available to musicians everywhere in exchange for appropriate compensation. The result is an extremely high-quality virtual singer, capable of sounding nigh indistinguishable from a real human voice with the right tuning and editing. But there's something to be said for the voices that don't sound so realistic. Even human performers perfectly capable of carrying a tune unaided will sometimes choose the roboticizing effects of autotune to better suit the style of a song. And Hatsune Miku herself found popularity in part because she sounded so different from a normal human voice. So in the era of AI voice banks, artists seeking a proudly strange and inhuman sound can most easily get it with UTAU, the free-to-download shareware vocal synth engine for which anyone can create a DIY voice bank, with anything from studio-quality samples to the janky recordings off their laptop microphone. There are so many UTAU voice banks out there that I could run this podcast for decades on character features alone without running out of material. But the best to start with is surely the one that's come bundled with the program from day one. Utane Uta, also known as Defoko, isn't a superstar like Hatsune Miku, and her muffled, robotic tone is starkly different from any AI voice. But as the default singer for one of the most versatile and popular engines out there, she definitely holds a place in the pantheon of vocal synth greats. Defoko and the program which hosts her both have names that are about as on the nose as it gets. UTAU is literally just the Japanese verb to sing. Utane Uta likewise means singing sound song, while her nickname, Defoko, comes from the English word default and the suffix ko, which is very common in Japanese feminine names. Consider the Vocaloid character Meiko, or the name Yamada Hanako, which is the Japanese equivalent to Jane Doe. So, the singing program named Sing, and its default voice bank, Default Girl the Song Singer, were released by programmer Amiya Ayame in March 2008. At the time, Vocaloid was on the upswing, this initial boom fueled by the popularity of Hatsune Miku. However, neither the base Vocaloid 2 editor nor the voice banks to use it with were cheap, and there wasn't much variety available in terms of vocal characteristics because there just hadn't been very many releases yet. These limitations fueled the practice of Jinriki Bokaroido, or manual Vocaloid. Basically, if you have some kind of sound editor and a lot of patience, just about any vocal track can be chopped up, rearranged, and pitch corrected to get a new vocal performance not unlike those created in a Vocaloid editor. UTAU was created in this DIY spirit, but automated the most time-consuming parts of the process. Vocaloid, Jinriki Bokaroido, and UTAU are all basically just different takes on what's known as concatenative synthesis. This is the process of creating a collection of short vocal samples and stringing them together to make new words. The difference between Vocaloid and UTAU is that while the former only works with the sample collections built to the standards of Yamaha's engine and licensed for sale accordingly, the base sound samples for UTAU can come from anywhere, even other pre-existing voice synths. Though I call this a podcast about singing robots, Defoko is a lot more robot than most of the characters I might talk about. While almost all singing synthesizers start with, well, an actual singer, Defoko's voice comes from the Japanese text-to-speech program Aquastalk Female Voice 1. As such, she is completely synthetic. In this regard, she is more in common with IBM 704, the computer from the 1960s whose performance of the song Daisy Bell inspired the iconic scene of HAL 3000's shutdown in the film 2001 A Space Odyssey, than she does with Hatsune Miku. In other aspects, however, Defoko very clearly follows Miku's example. Defoko's character design is based off of a drawing by Amiya, with her official illustration by artist Derenta chosen by a contest. Her outfit, which includes thigh-high boots, detached sleeves, and a necktie, is basically a palette swap of Hatsune Miku from the neck down. It's a little odd to see a character whose influences are so obvious, especially looking back today when we've had years' worth of properly original and unique character designs. But this sort of thing was actually pretty common in art from early Vocaloid fan circles. From the numerous fanloid derivative characters, such as Yoane Haku, Akitaneru, and Hagane Miku, to a good portion of popular early UTAUloids such as Kasane Teto, Yokone Ruko, and Sukone Te, cribbing off of Miku's look was just what you did as a pioneering fan of singing robots. If nothing else, I'll grant Amiya some originality points for Defoko's fun hat. Getting back to the history, UTAU quickly became a popular free alternative to Vocaloid, both for cover artists just looking to play around with their favorite songs, and a few songwriters making original music. The first such original to use Defoko, which was accordingly the first UTAU original period, was Ken Kawakare by NWP8861, also known as Mimi Robopi, uploaded May 13, 2008. The first use of the nickname Defoko came about a month later in a non-musical video by Wanaipi in June. Amiya then canonized the nickname with a song called Defoko no Uta, or Song of the Default Girl, that he released on the 14th of November 2008. Meanwhile, the fandom culture of UTAU spun off in its own unique direction, existing alongside Vocaloid but with its own distinct trends and tropes. Part of this is because, while Vocaloid characters, generally speaking, don't tend to have much in the way of personality traits or official backstory provided for them by the companies, UTAU characters can have way more lore behind them. I've seen everything from a short rundown of the UTAUloids' likes and dislikes to elaborate character sheets you'd think were for a manga protagonist rather than a vocal synth. And this does make sense to me. UTAU projects are much more personal than a commercial product like Vocaloid. People usually make them just for fun, and the voice provider and programmer are often one and the same. Obviously, that isn't the case for Defoko, but considering all of the work it would have taken for Amiya to create and popularize a whole new vocal synth engine, I think we can still safely call it a project very near and dear to his heart. The personality details for Defoko are a bit on the sparser side, but the UTAU wiki describes her as a robot with a cool, friendly personality, though she can also be a bit of a bully. She likes rice and dislikes Daruma dolls, which are those little Japanese roly-poly dolls painted up in red to look like a stylized Bodhidharma. They're often used as a sort of a good luck talisman. Her signature item, a trend for which I can't find a conclusive origin, but which I'm willing to guess can be at least partially credited to Hatsune Miku, and her association with leaks by way of the Ievan Polka meme, is apparently a rocket-powered grenade. If hearing that threw you for a bit of a loop, that's probably deliberate. There was always a sense of mischief to most of the UTAU pioneers. Utane Uta set a silly tone with her silly name, and subsequent creators upped the ante from there. The second UTAU character ever created, Kasane Teto, was originally an April Fool's joke, a fake Vocaloid announced to prank fans of Hatsune Miku. Teto has since become more than popular enough to deserve her own episode, but until I get around to writing it, I'll keep it brief and say that her own character description on the UTAU wiki is like a time capsule of absurdist late-aughts internet humor. As for the third ever UTAUloid, Momone Momo has another silly name, a sensitive personality, and apparently a detachable head. She's listed as the most frequent victim of Defoko's bully tendencies, but the two of them are nonetheless grouped together with Teto as the three UTAU girls. As I said, Teto has ended up the most popular of the three, but I'd argue that their association as a trio has helped to keep all three relevant, even as new UTAU banks started being released in great enough numbers that it stopped being useful to keep track of their release order. Some of these new voice banks were further projects from Amiya himself. He actually made a whole family of UTAUloids with Aquastalk samples, all of them sharing Defoko's purple and grey color scheme for their characters. Utane Koe was created by processing the same samples used for Utane Uta, who has a rather subdued alto voice, into a cuter and younger sounding soprano. There's also Defosuke, or Default Boy, and Defota Itadaki, tenor and bass voice banks made from Aquastalk's male voices. I haven't seen any of them used as much as Defoko, and they don't come pre-installed with the program, but they're an important part of the small but fascinating contingent of UTAU banks built from entirely inhuman sound sources. A lot of these other such voice banks were created as memes, or gimmick projects. Defoko's Aquastalk voice source has also been used for a bank called Yukuri Reimu, which is in turn based off of some sort of Toho project meme. I don't know the details, and I'm frankly a little intimidated to look more into it. From where I'm ignorantly standing, Toho lore looks like a black hole. I've also seen various instrument samples processed to run like an UTAU voice bank. These often have mascot characters like any human-based voice bank, but the sound sources range from pianos and bass guitars to, and I quote, that one bottle UTAU thing I saw referenced in a forum thread and have been driving myself crazy trying to find ever since, because frankly it just sounds hilarious. And of course, I'd be remiss not to mention Arachi Rei, arguably the greatest synthetic success story of the UTAU world. Like Teto, she's probably worthy of her own episode someday, but she's best known for the song Heat Abnormal by Iowa, a song which has racked up over 11 million views on Nico Video and YouTube in the 2 years since its release in October of 2022. For what it's worth, I personally find Ray's voice a little too piercing for my ears, so I prefer to listen to covers rather than the original song. And there's some lovely covers out there which feature Defoko. Of course, by jumping to Heat Abnormal, I skipped over a huge chunk of UTAU history. Some of it we'll keep for another episode, but there's 3 topics in particular worth stepping back to. First, there's the development of alternative phonetic systems, which is still an ongoing process. The original Utane Uta bank uses a simple consonant-vowel configuration, or CV. It's perfectly adequate for Japanese, which doesn't put multiple consonants in the same syllable, but not so much for the tangled conglomeration that is the English language. And even then, CV Japanese banks can be pretty choppy and inflexible. Thus, UTAU users have developed ever more ways to organize their voice banks, whether in the name of smoother Japanese performance or to find ways to incorporate new languages. They all basically come down to different ways of arranging consonants and vowels, while the contents of the sample collection being arranged will be informed by the intended language, what's known as a recording list, or rec list. Rec lists for phonetically dense languages like English or Hindi will obviously be longer, while a Japanese rec list will have less in it, usually. Sometimes, rather than make an entire separate voice bank to cover other phonemes, UTAU creators will simply add some bonus sounds to their basic library. This can allow for more nuance in the intended language. English, for example, doesn't have trilling R sounds like Spanish, but it can add some pizzazz to be able to roll one's R's anyway. And it also gives some wiggle room for users to fudge performances in languages that a voice bank isn't really made for. Defoko herself has an expanded phonetic spread like this in her official voice bank, with extra sounds like fa and we, which are not a part of standard Japanese. These still fit into the simple CV configuration, but this is where I draw attention to the fact that I said official voice bank. The Aquastalk software isn't hard to get, and I've already noted that other people have used it to make voice banks. As such, there are various unofficial versions of Utane Uta floating around on the internet, including a fairly popular vowel-consonant-vowel bank that balances the lo-fi charm of Aquastalk with relative clarity and smoothness. If you search up Defoko on YouTube, a cover of Deco27's popular song Ghost Rule with this VCV bank is in the top 10 results. Now, this practice is somewhat iffy from the standpoint of ownership and copyright, as creating a voice bank from a sound source you don't have permission to sample is against UTAU's terms of use. That said, pretty much every example I've seen of these unofficial voice banks has been in a non-commercial context. Covers and the like, stuff that people have made just for fun. So I've yet to find any evidence of anyone actually getting in serious trouble for making or using these voice banks. Amiya has also largely stepped away from UTAU now, and more on that in a minute. So for my money, he's not especially motivated to chase people down for their knockoffs. Regardless, all of this innovation was already well on track by the time of the next big shift for UTAU, which was the introduction of UTAU Synth. The original UTAU program was Windows only, the same as the first few generations of Vocaloid. Attempts had been made at creating a Mac-friendly vocal synth engine, Maknae Nana probably being the best-known example, since she was later co-opted by UTAU and then by Vocaloid itself. But they never really took off. Then, UTAU Synth launched in May of 2011 as the Mac equivalent to UTAU, designed to be backwards compatible so that all of the old favorite UTAU voice banks built for the original Windows system could also work in UTAU Synth. It didn't quite work the other way, as some of the features on UTAU Synth couldn't be ported back to UTAU for Windows, but it opened up vocal synthesizers to a huge swath of new creators. Vocaloid wouldn't have anything Mac compatible until Vocaloid Neo launched in 2013, and even then, Mac users also needed to have some version of Steinberg's pricey Cubase program in order to use Vocaloid at all the way up until 2018 when Vocaloid 5 came out. UTAU Synth did have most of the same limitations as the original program, however. Vocaloid got a proper overhaul every few years, but Amiya was just one guy, and he was, understandably, ready to move on to new things after a while. He stopped updating UTAU in 2013, which brings me to the third big turning point, which is the creation of Open UTAU. After Amiya stopped updating, a Vocaloid producer called Saint Akira took it upon themselves to create a successor program. They posted the first sneak peek of the project to GitHub on the 27th of November 2014, but it would take several more years of work before the public beta release on the 21st of August 2021. Besides being a general modernization of UTAU, something to ensure compatibility with newer computers and provide a fresh new interface, the biggest difference with this project is that Open UTAU is entirely open source. This means that other people can contribute their own ideas for updating the program itself, rather than just making their third-party add-ons in the form of voice banks. There are servers on Discord and other forums for both users and developers to fix bugs and plan future development. And OpenUTAU works not only for Windows and Mac, but also the famously DIY-spirited Linux operating system. Of course, since OpenUTAU is not being run by Amea, Defoko no longer comes pre-installed. For another voice bank, this might mean a slow fade into obscurity, but Defoko still seems quite popular, whether it's her original CV bank or one of the various alternate options people have created. That people still bother with her strikes me as the strongest argument for the appeal of lo-fi voice banks, which is an appeal that I didn't always understand. The first time I heard Defoko's voice, I had actually been listening to vocal synth music for several years already, and she just sort of slipped under my radar the whole time. It's not as if I was looking very hard. I wasn't especially interested in UTAU at the time, not when there was so much to keep my attention just by sticking to Vocaloid and Vocaloid alone. My exposure to UTAU mostly came in the form of those medley covers, where people would gather up dozens of voice banks to sing a mashup somebody had made of a whole bunch of Vocaloid songs. By sheer coincidence, the ones I found just never seemed to include Defoko, though I distinctly remember Utane Uta in almost every one of them, oddly enough. But then, I discovered the artist Ghost, who at the time was using the name Mars Mitzi. They wrote a song with Defoko called Today, which I found utterly mesmerizing. It was sad and dreamy and harsh and gentle all at once, with Defoko's muffled voice lending to the overall sense of blurry, rueful nostalgia. The original upload has since been taken down, and now the only official version of the song which exists is a rearranged cover by Lauren Estes, which features the Vocaloid Ivana instead of Defoko. However, I kept a backup of my music library from my laptop at the time, so I still have that old MP3 file of the original. The mixing is a mess compared to Ghost's more recent work, but overall, the song holds up. The internet being what it is, it also isn't hard to find unofficial re-uploads, though I have rather mixed feelings about that. Ghost was well within their rights to delete their own work at their own discretion, and they would have been even if their early fandom hadn't been mired in drama and inappropriate behavior, ranging from well-intentioned obnoxiousness to genuinely appalling disrespect of boundaries. My personal, big-picture belief in the importance of archiving internet content is very much at war here with my disapproval of how blatantly people disregard Ghost's wishes when they re-upload their old music. But I digress. My point in bringing this particular song up is that it was the thing that got me really interested in the broader world of vocal synth beyond just Vocaloid. I'd more or less understood the appeal of UTAU from a financial angle, but that was about it. After all, you need an awful lot of disposable income to buy enough Vocaloid voice banks to fill the roster in those long medley covers. But I didn't really get why people would go for something that sounded more robotic on purpose. This was long before AI voices made it easy to get a human-sounding synth performance, so what impressed me most at the time was when people could create something realistic through careful tuning, which wasn't always possible with an UTAU voice bank. For whatever reason, though, Defoko and Today made it click. It's not appropriate for every genre, but obviously fake voices can sometimes be the best choice to express very real feelings. I still prefer to work with AI voice banks myself. For all of my interest in the strange niches of vocal synthesizer technology, I'm not actually particularly tech-savvy myself, so I gravitate towards programs like Synthesizer V, where I don't feel like my laptop is trying to tease me to death. I'm uploading this very episode a few days later than I intended, and one of the myriad reasons for that, only a few of which are probably better described as lame excuses, is that I spent a genuinely embarrassing amount of time trying and failing to install OpenUTAU and Defoko so I could get a better first-hand understanding of what I was talking about. I've since put that endeavor on hold for the sake of my own sanity, but in researching this story, I found a staggering amount of resources to help me try again. There are video tutorials, text tutorials, forum discussions, nerdy old blogs 6 pages deep in the search results where UTAU enthusiasts have taken the time to write down their tips and tricks. There is so much collaboration and hard work in this community. Thousands of voice banks, dozens of clever ways to make them, too many original songs to count, and even more covers. And it all started with the most charmingly marble-mouthed little default girl you could ask for. 39 big thank yous for listening, everyone. If you haven't yet, follow this pod, leave a review if you're feeling generous, and check out linktree/Happy Synthesizers to find the full suite of social media, listening platforms, transcripts, and sources documents. Happy Synthesizers is written and performed by Kay Judson. The theme music is Ivan Polka, arranged with inspiration from Lloyd Tuma and Automania.